Welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast, addressing all aspects of the digital enterprise, inspiring connection without boundaries and creation without limits. Thank you for tuning in. Here are your hosts, Tom Singer and Craig Brown.
Well, hello there, and welcome to, or welcome back to, if you're a repeat listener, to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Thank you so much for coming along on the journey of this show that is designed to be a resource for those who work in and around PLM. The Digital Enterprise Society is a forum for the exchange of ideas surrounding the tools, processes, and practices used across the product lifecycle. To learn more, visit digitalenterprisesociety.org. My name is Tom Singer, and I have the honor every week to co-host this show with Craig Brown, an industry veteran and a former PLM leader at General Motors. Hey, Craig, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Tom. It's good to hear your voice, and looking forward to today's conversation. It's a bit different. We're going to talk about one of the necessary functions within the digital ecosystem, that of configuration management.
We sure are, and we have a great guest because every single week we look hard to bring to this podcast interesting interviews and other ideas to help all of the listeners enhance and grow their careers. And today is going to be one of those episodes where people go, wow, I'm going to listen to this one twice, because we are interviewing Laura Hooker. Hi, Laura. How are you today?
Good. How are you?
We're doing great. So Laura is the owner of J2E Technologies. Now, this is a woman-owned business that focuses on configuration and data management support for mainly the Department of the Navy. And she's not just woman-owned, but she employs a lot of women in this space of configuration and data support. And so we're going to have some fun talking about what it is that J2E Technology does and your views of the industry. So, Laura, give us a little bit of background of your story and what your background was and how you got to where you are with J2E Technologies.
Oh, well, thank you very much. This is a real honor to be able to do this. And I'd love to tell you a little bit about my career. After serving 10 years in the Navy, where I worked in communications, my husband and I decided we were going to move to San Diego, where I took my first defense contracting position. My supervisor handed me a copy of Mill Handbook, Mill Standard 973, and said, write me a CM plan. I couldn't even spell CM at the point. Well, the rest is history. I found my passion. I absolutely loved what I was doing. So after being a CM manager for several years for different Navy programs, I got the opportunity to become a government employee. So there I gained a tremendous amount of experience in acquisition management. And after several years of being a project manager for a variety of different programs, I ended up managing a $2 billion network program. But I decided I was really unhappy doing acquisition work. So I sat down and had a conversation with my husband, and we discussed when was the last time I really enjoyed my job. Well, that choice was clear. I was happy doing CM, but I didn't want to do it the same way this time. I wanted to work for myself. So I started my own company, and we specialize in nothing but configuration and data management for the Department of Defense. That's kind of how J2E was born.
That's interesting. Laura, how J2E, it's an interesting name. It's always fun to ask people why that name.
Oh, well, I get asked that quite a bit. So people think it's like this Java kind of thing, and it's not. So first, you really have to understand that my big focus is on my grandchildren. So my grandchildren's name are Jessica and Joseph. And everything I do is for Jessica and Joseph. So J2E actually stands for Jessica and Joseph Everything. Technology just made it sound really good in the environment that we work in.
Well, that's interesting. Okay, so have you taught, well, how old are Jessica and Jonathan, did you say?
Jessica and Joseph. Jessica is 13 and Joseph is 7.
Okay, so do they know what configuration management is?
No, not yet.
Well, it's about time. You know, when they want to understand why something doesn't work, it might be the configuration, right?
Can't start them too.
There you go.
So tell us why, from a practitioner's point of view, why is configuration management and data management so important? And maybe give us a couple of examples.
So, So CM is the process for identifying, documenting, and managing all the changes to your hardware, your software components, and the associated configuration system settings. Without a good CM process for collecting this data and a good tool to manage the data, simple data calls can become very time-consuming and almost impossible to gather. So, for example, several years ago, we had an incident where we had a simple data call where we needed to know what ships in the fleet had a version of Windows on it. Well, because of poor CM, I hear you laughing. That's really funny.
Well, this happens everywhere. Keep going.
Because of poor CM, the data call literally took people traveling to ships to figure out what the operating system was loaded on board servers and workstations. This process took a year, if not more, and cost a ridiculous amount of money. With today's threats and cyber attacks, this information has to be readily available at the fingertips of the people who need it. By implementing sound CM in principles into their engineering and operation processes, this information should be collected and reported on in real time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and have you been able to make that painless? And well, part of what I'm thinking about, the groups that I managed at General Motors, I would always get pushback from the more creative and experimental folks, the guys up in research, because they didn't want to be constrained, and they viewed configuration management and data management as a form of constraint. Did you ever have to deal with that? And if so, what was the way to convince them that we still needed to know the versions of things, the versions of Windows or the versions of hardware or whatever?
Oh, so we actually deal with that all the time. Mm-hmm. So what we found is that if we put a large group of engineers and logistics operations folks into a room and try and solve a problem, they're going to spend more time pointing the finger at each other than they are actually coming to solution to fix the problem or to determine what the configuration should be or is. What we advocate for, and as we work with different projects within the Navy, we try to get them to realize that this is a better approach, is to establish small teams. And in those small teams, bring in individuals from each functional area, engineering, logistics, security, project management, and have that team responsible for determining a solution and the impact, rather than making it something that is, this whole big group. Well, when you do this, you end up with a team that they end up walking out of the solution design with more well-rounded knowledge of what everybody else is going through. So it actually makes better engineers, better logistics, better security people, because they're taking more of a holistic system approach rather than just their individual piece of the pie. Yeah. Now, I have to tell you, this is not easy to do, and implementing it in the beginning is more than a little rocky, but we have found that if projects really stick with this and continue this, that over the time, they end up with a much better product and a much better team because everybody can work together.
Yeah, I like your point about the teams are more holistic. They can see further or better understand how they fit into the larger enterprise, whether that be an operational thing or a particular design thing. There's a pretty good book about teams of teams. It was about the efforts in the engagements we had in Afghanistan and Iraq. So it was written by one of the generals. But one of the things that he emphasized was the same point you just made about the teams need to have different functions on them. Do you have a best practice for how you make sure the team is constructed properly, either the number of roles or the total number of people?
So each team that we tell them to kind of put together, really focuses on the main areas of that individual project. So if the project is more of, you know, an R&D project, but they don't have a lot of logistics support that they're thinking about at that point in time, you know, the team is going to be much more engineering, security kind of focused. But if it is a project where they're going to, this is something that they know they're going to field, it's a full program of record for the Navy, then we're going to say you need to pull in somebody from each one of your functional areas because they all have a stake. So it really depends on the project, on where they are in the life cycle, on when, where they're going in the future. I would love to say there was a clear-cut answer, but it really depends.
No, I think you're exactly right. And sometimes it's technology driven, and sometimes it's life cycle driven. I mean, you're in the operational mode versus a creation mode. You know, given your insights and your experience both directly and now as a supplier to the Department of Defense, what are the digital challenges you see? I mean, is it, you know, one you mentioned was Windows. Is it too easy to upgrade? Maybe it should be more rigorous. Or do you see other opportunities as well?
So actually, I'm so glad you asked that, because right now it's such an exciting time within the DoD because of two very specific digital transformation efforts that are underway within the Navy. One is they're going to a model-based system engineering approach, right? So they're getting rid of all their 2D drawings, going into 3D models, and starting to really look at things as a system of systems, because everything is connected. Every application connects to other applications, and other systems feed each one data. They need to communicate as a whole. And they're really starting to take that approach through the MBSC initiatives that they have going on. And then the other thing is, it's funny that you mentioned upgrading slower, because they want to be able to upgrade faster. They're implementing a DevOps mentality where they're trying to do what they do, calling compile to combat in 24 hours. So they can get products out to the fleet in these small little containers much faster and give them these little pieces rather than giving them this big, huge product every year or so. But there's challenges with this that are really, you know, the Navy loves to do everything separately, right? They don't want to necessarily bring their initiatives together. So that's the biggest challenge with this effort right now, is that both the MBSC group and the DevOps groups are working completely separate from each other. And so
I'm glad to see it. I'm glad to see it's that way elsewhere.
So I'd like to see commercial world has it all figured out, and the Navy is just behind the times, right?
Well, the commercial world has it figured out in the stuff that's really critical, which really means where they invest a lot of money, right? But this speed thing that you mentioned, the frequency of update, yeah, that's hitting everybody, and you won't be successful if you don't do configuration management. You just won't be. You'll eventually create a disaster, right? And so I was chuckling because just the way you said it, a lot of organizational change issues are around this unwillingness to work together, right? And part of it's they just don't know each other, right? It's interesting when you build teams successfully is when you know that they start working together. When you see evidence of that, you know you've done it really well. So it's interesting. Yeah, you hit one of my nerves. I'm always surprised at how the new initiative thinks they're so much better, and yet they're not playing with the operational details. This is where DevOps has a lot of potential, because I think it keeps everybody focused, right? We're doing this in a continuous learning way, and it should influence the next cycle, and cycles could be a week long instead of a year long, right? But
Well, and they're really working towards getting that way, and they're, you know, I've been calling it within our environment kind of this perfect storm, right? People are finally starting to take CM seriously. So like just last month, we were awarded a contract to develop a prototype using ARIS to connect the MBSC world and the DevOps world together so that we would have full configuration management in one tool. But the DevOps folks, they can still use their Jira and their Jenkins and their Git and whatever tool is coming next. Right. And the MBSC folks, they're still going to use their Magic Draw or their, you know, whatever the next tool is. Right. But because of the open architecture of ARIS, we're going to be able to bring it all in together and give them a holistic picture of what the system of systems looks like. And I have to tell you, I'm so excited to be doing this. I just feel like this is really going to change the way the Navy is doing configuration management, and the fact that my little company gets to be part of it, pretty cool.
Yeah, you've chosen a good platform. I've dabbled a bit with the ARIS Innovator folks, and it'll be interesting. And in fact, some of the car companies now, General Motors and Denso and a few others, are starting to use ARIS Innovator more and more. And it's partly for the reason you said, is to connect the legacy systems. You know, not so much yet for MBSE, but that'll probably happen over time. But yeah, it's really interesting. Well, you met us, or we met you at the IPX conference, which was a few months ago now. And I'm kind of curious, from your point of view, how should the Digital Enterprise Society be helping the challenges you see?
Well, so the DES is a great way for people to share knowledge and perspective. I love the way that they do webinars, and you can sign up and listen to topics that people are passionate about. We just did one back in October on baseline management. Miss Lisa July provided it. It was very well received. We had lots of people listening in. So that kind of outlet for people to be able to provide that information, I think, is really important, and people need to do more of them and be involved in the efforts that are going on.
Interesting. So think about our listening audience. It's a, you know, last few decades, people from PLM world, practitioners of CAD and configuration management for at least the virtual model. How do you see the Digital Enterprise Society helping with what you're trying to do with the Navy?
Well, I'd love to say that the Navy's problems are really no different than industries. I think, but I'd also like to think that industries figured out already how to solve them. If there was a way that we could learn more from you guys, from industry, how they've solved the problems, so that government doesn't have to go reinvent the wheel. Because, you know, we all know that when government's here to help, it's never a good thing, right? So we definitely don't want to add in the extra steps that government bureaucracy can add in. So being able to reach back into industry is really huge for me. That's where I find this very important, very informative.
Yeah, you have to look carefully. There are some things industry does well because they're profit-making companies, right? There's other things where maybe not so well, and it just depends. One of the things that I've had a passion on is product line engineering, the ability to share reusable systems and subsystems across products. And even as you get into the life cycle, so the DevOps back end side of this, and you learn in the field, you want to make upgrades to the products while the product is in the customer's hands. Well, that should be no different for the Navy than it is for General Motors, right? It's just a matter of scale and what's your operational profile. So anyways, I do think there's things to share. Now, one of the other audiences we try to serve in the Digital Enterprise Society are small and medium-sized companies. And at least in the car business, a lot of those folks struggle a little bit with digital technologies. Is that a similar problem in the defense industry, or is everybody pretty much on board with whatever tools they're using for management and configuration management?
No, not everybody is on board. So, you know, a lot of times when government people are given the role of being a CM manager, they have no, it's a collateral duty. They don't know how to use the tools that they're given, and they're just told, here, go do it. It's definitely not, I don't know how to word this right. It's not necessarily as simple as everybody thinks it should be. Mm-hmm. So they don't embrace the tools that they have the way that they should in order to really bring it all together.
Yeah, one of the arguments I use or debating points I use with people about configuration management is just it's like running any experiment. If you've ever been a scientist, even if it was back in your schooling ages before you were in high school, about how do you control an experiment? Well, you have to know exactly the configuration. You have to know the inputs and outputs and what you're trying to monitor. If there's any amount of noise, uncertainty, well, then it becomes a much harder problem. And that's really what's behind the MIL standards for configuration management. And you know, if you do it well, then you can focus on real problems, right? Be they durability problems or service problems or whatever, as opposed to, oh, we didn't know what parts were put into that product, or we don't know what the upgrade status is, or we don't even know why we are doing this upgrade, right? When you start hearing that kind of a language, it's people have lost control of their experiment. They don't know what the goal is anymore, right? So this is interesting. Well, do you have any advice beyond what we've already talked about for Digital Enterprise Society members? What would you like to get from them if they could help you?
That's really interesting. So I guess what I kind of would like, kind of my soapbox on configuration management, is instead of fighting CM every step of the way, and really thinking of it as an admin task that should be done at the end of a life cycle, build it into your processes and your tools. If you do that, CM becomes transparent. It's not something that is done after the fact, and it really becomes something that is faster and simpler, and you know that full configuration at the end, and you know how you got there and why you got there. That to me, you know, transparent CM is kind of the one thing that I really feel is the most important thing that we do, is to be able to bring that into the Department of the Navy.
That's really well said. Hey, Tom, it's back to you.
I thought this was a great discussion, but the one thing I wanted to go back to that I touched on in your introduction is that you are a woman-owned business and you employ a lot of women. And so as someone is coming up and growing their career in this overall space, whether they're working for the government or whether they're doing contract work or they work for a for-profit entity, what advice, I always like to take this show back to for the listener. So what? Why does any of this matter? So what advice do you have? In your case, I'm going to say for young women who are looking to grow a career, what would you tell them?
So, God, I have a perfect example of this. One of the people that I hired just recently, actually a couple years ago, she had absolutely no CM experience, no Department of Defense experience, but she had a desire to learn. So what I did is we hired her, we brought her online, we got her set up with IPX. She did the online classes, which if you've never done those online classes, they're really great because it gives you a full month to really absorb the information rather than getting it fire hosed at you in a week or so. And then we coupled that with a lot of mentoring from both myself and my VP of data intelligence. And we set her up with the skills that she needed to succeed. Anybody coming into this industry, you need a mentor. You need somebody who's been doing this a while, who really is willing to teach you how to do it. And you need to get hooked up with an organization like IPX that really teaches you how to do configuration management the right way. Investing that time and money is really going to give you the people within your company that you want to have working for you, and it's going to give people the skills that they need to make sure you're setting your people up to succeed.
And we talk a lot here at the Digital Enterprise Society about mentorship. That is a big thing. In fact, they've recently started a mentorship program. We did a whole podcast episode a few months ago about the importance of being a mentor and how, as a mentee, you can find that right mentor. So this is a topic that comes up over and over again. And so your example is fantastic. She comes to work for you, and you guys mentor her and help her grow. What if someone's not so lucky that their boss is being their mentor? How do people get this mentorship without that?
Well, I mean, that's where groups like DES is definitely going to come in. If there is a mentoring program there, you need to be able to reach out to these people and really help them out. Over the years, I've actually had a couple of people that I've really looked up to and would consider my mentors. One of them was a system engineer who absolutely believed in CM. He was instrumental in everything that I have learned and become over the years. And then you also have to have that somebody who's been doing CM for a while. You need to be able to reach out to them. And there are a lot of organizations where we exist, and people just need to be able to not be afraid to go take that step to find somebody to really help them out.
The other thing I've heard a lot of us talk about is, those of you listening, just reach out. If it's not in your current leadership chain, then reach out within your company or reach out across companies. You'll be surprised. And, it is a journey. These mentorships will pay off long-term, even if in the short term it seems like it's a little bit of extra work. They come back to pay you in all kinds of return later in your career. So just reach out. You'll be surprised. Most of us will be glad to help you.
Laura,
we are.
Laura, thank you so much for being a guest here on the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Do you have any last words of wisdom for the listeners?
Document your configuration.
So Laura,
yeah, make the robot do it. No, I'm just joking.
There you go.
If someone's listening here and they want to get in touch with you, or maybe they need to find out a little more about J2E Technologies, how do they find it?
They can go to www.j2etech.com. We are also on LinkedIn, so either place will get us.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And everyone who listened, thank you so much for joining in. You know what? Next week, we're going to be back with more thoughts and ideas and information in and around product lifecycle management. The Digital Enterprise Society is the place for the exchange of ideas around digital manufacturing tools. Check us out at digitalenterprisesociety.org.
You've been listening to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Learn more about what you've heard here today at digitalenterprisesociety.org.